My parents have a vacation house in Quincy, California, sitting on about 2 acres and surrounded by forest. When my siblings and I were younger, we used to go there together all the time as a family. Now that we are all grown up, it has become difficult to match schedules and visit together. Back when I had just started seeing my girlfriend Rose, I mentioned the place to her around our 5th date. It was October, and the leaves in Quincy were changing, making everything look incredibly beautiful. I casually suggested that we could spend a weekend there, and she immediately agreed. Just 2 days later, we were packing for the trip. I picked her up from her place, and we hit the road. The drive took around 5 hours. We spent the time talking about everything from TV shows to family and childhood memories. We also listened to comedians and podcasts to pass the time. When we finally arrived in Quincy, I drove her through the small town first because I wanted her to see how charming it was. About 10 minutes later, we reached the house. There is a small wooden gate at the driveway that we keep closed whenever no one is there. It is not locked, just there to discourage people from entering. I got out, opened it, and we drove onto the property. My dad hires landscapers every couple of weeks during the summer and into the fall, so everything looked neat and well maintained. Rose was impressed. It was around lunchtime, so we unpacked, I showed her around, and I turned on the hot tub so it would be ready later. After that, we headed into town to eat at one of my favorite spots. Once we were done, we explored a bit and visited the Plumas County Museum. By then, it was starting to get dark, so we went back to the house and spent some time relaxing in the hot tub. The hot tub was on the back deck under a covering. It was cold outside, but the water felt great until we both heard leaves crunching nearby, like someone walking. We assumed it might be a bear, so we quickly got out and rushed inside. I shut off all the lights, thinking it might help avoid attracting wildlife. I looked out one of the windows, expecting to see a bear, but instead I saw the outline of a person walking along the side of the house. I immediately ran to the back door, locked it, and closed the blinds. I told Rose to stay quiet. The footsteps continued around the house until they reached the front door, then stopped. After a short pause, there was a knock, and a voice called out, saying it was the police. We were confused. I went to the door and asked through it if there was a problem. The person said they had received a call about a break-in. I questioned how that could be possible, since the nearest neighbor is about a quarter-mile away. There was a pause before he answered. Then he said he needed me to open the door. I told him I was not comfortable doing that. I decided to check outside for a police car. I slightly lifted the blinds just enough to see. It was dim outside, but still light enough to make out that there were no police vehicles anywhere. I told Rose I did not think it was actually a cop. The man knocked again. I told him I could not see a police car and did not feel safe opening the door. He did not respond. After a moment of silence, we thought he had left. A couple of minutes went by while we stayed in the living room talking quietly. Then we heard heavy footsteps moving away from the door. He had been standing there the whole time without us realizing it. I checked the window again, but saw no one. He must have walked off in a different direction. The unsettling part was that the house is surrounded by woods, so he could approach from anywhere. We decided we were not going back outside that night, except for me briefly stepping out to turn off the hot tub bubbles. After that, we stayed in the bedroom, watched movies, and eventually went to sleep. I kept my dad's shotgun from the closet under the bed. The next day, we went hiking in Plumas National Forest. Later, we grabbed food and went to watch a movie at a nearby theater. By the time we returned to the house, it was getting dark. As we pulled in, Rose suddenly screamed, and I almost swerved the car. I slammed on the brakes and asked what happened. She pointed toward someone quickly walking away from the house toward the woods until they vanished into the darkness. I tried to calm her down as she started panicking, saying someone might be following us. I told her we would be fine, that we had a gun, and we were leaving the next morning anyway. Even so, I was uneasy too. I parked as close to the house as possible, and we quickly went inside. I checked every door and window to make sure everything was locked. We stayed inside for the rest of the night. We packed our things so we could leave early, then went to the bedroom. After watching a movie, we went to sleep. Later that night, I began hearing a strange scraping sound coming from outside. It would happen every few seconds, then stop, then start again. I could not tell what it was, but something was definitely out there. I worried that the same person had come back. I waited until the sound stopped completely before quietly getting out of bed so I would not wake Rose. I walked to the window, slightly lifted the blinds, and suddenly found myself face to face with a man standing outside, trying to look in. He definitely saw me. I fell back and shouted, "Jesus Christ!" Rose woke up immediately. I did not explain right away. I grabbed the shotgun from under the bed, made sure it was loaded, then ran out the back door. I fired it into the air while yelling as loud as I could, trying to scare whoever was out there. I think I shot 3 times before going back inside. After that, I told Rose what I had seen. Strangely, I felt a rush of adrenaline after going outside like that. Maybe that is why I felt somewhat confident that the person would not return. Once the adrenaline wore off, the fear came back. Lying in bed, I was on edge, listening for any sound from outside. We made it through the rest of the night. The next morning, I called the police and reported everything that had happened. My family has gone back to that house a few times since then, and thankfully, whoever that man was has never shown up again, at least not while we were there. I was driving through Colorado late at night. I had reached Tabernash, and it was around 1 a.m. I pulled over at a gas station to fill up and grab something to eat. Once I finished, I got back on the road right away. There were barely any cars out at that hour, especially on the roads I was taking, but I still stuck to the speed limit. It was late. I was tired, and you never know when a cop might be nearby. I was going about 55 on a curvy stretch of road when suddenly I saw flashing lights in my rearview mirror. I checked again and noticed a vehicle behind me with red and white lights flashing. I pulled over, but not before glancing at my speed to confirm I was only about 2 miles per hour over the limit. I stopped on the side of the road, and the vehicle pulled over behind me. I felt really irritated. I had never been pulled over before, and I consider myself a careful and responsible driver. It immediately felt like I was being stopped for no valid reason. When the officer approached my window, I rolled it down. He greeted me and asked for my license and registration. Trying to stand my ground, I asked why he had pulled me over. He said he would explain shortly. I told him I knew I had not been speeding or driving recklessly, and my lights were all working, so I did not feel comfortable handing over my license if the stop was not justified. Then I took a closer look at his uniform. Something about it did not seem right. He was dressed entirely in black, wearing a vest that looked similar to a police vest, but it did not say police anywhere on it. Even his badge did not say police. It read Criminal Task Force. He kept insisting that I hand over my license and registration. I directly asked him if he was actually a police officer. He replied that he was part of an undercover unit. Then he repeated his request for my license. I asked for his badge number. He told me he did not have to provide that. I knew enough about traffic stops to realize that was not true. I also noticed his lights were only red and white, with no blue at all. I was not completely certain if that alone meant anything, but combined with everything else, it made me even more suspicious. Then he told me to step out of the car. I calmly said I was not comfortable doing that unless a supervisor came to the scene. His tone changed, becoming louder and more forceful. He repeated that I needed to get out of the vehicle. I responded that I did not believe he was a real officer, and if he was, he should have no issue calling a supervisor. I rolled my window up slightly, which seemed to irritate him. He started yelling at me to open the door, placing his hands on my window and trying to unlock it. I pushed his hands away, started the car, and shifted into drive. I heard him shout for me to stop as I accelerated away. My heart was pounding. I was hoping I had made the right call, because if I had not, I could end up in serious trouble. But at the same time, if I was right, then I had just escaped a very dangerous situation. As I drove off, still keeping within the speed limit, I saw his car chasing me with the lights still flashing. I quickly called 911. I told the operator that someone I believed to be a fake police officer was following me. I explained that he refused to give his badge number. His car was unmarked and did not have blue lights, and his uniform did not say police anywhere. After asking for my location and more details, she told me to head to the nearest police station, which was the Fraser Winter Park Police Department. She said an officer would meet me there. The man continued following me for part of the drive, but then at an intersection, he suddenly turned off his lights and made a right turn, disappearing from view. He was gone, and in that moment, I knew my instincts had been right. I still drove to the police station, where an officer was already waiting in his car in the parking lot. I pulled in, and he stepped out, immediately recognizing that I was the person he was expecting. I told him everything that had happened, describing the man, his vehicle, and the exact intersection where he turned off. He took my contact information, likely in case they needed me later to identify the suspect. After a few minutes, I left. I am grateful I trusted my instincts and refused to step out of the car. I cannot even begin to imagine what might have happened if I had. I am 29 years old, and on weekends I stay alone at my house in a small town in Michigan. I come here to get away from the busy city life that I grew up in and have grown tired of. I enjoy the quiet and isolation of the countryside, though my house and land feel like something straight out of a horror movie setting. It is a house surrounded by a large piece of land, with neighbors spaced far apart. There is not much crime in the town, but that is mostly because there are not many people living here. I do not have many friends nearby, but that is not the reason I visit anyway. I come here to be by myself and take a break from work and people during the week. One Friday, not long after arriving at the house, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, there was a man holding a clipboard. Right away, I could tell he was trying to sell something. He asked if I was satisfied with my home security system. I told him I did not have one and was not really interested. I even joked that nobody would bother breaking into a house like mine. He continued with his sales pitch, mentioning several recent break-ins in the area that I had honestly never heard about. Then he asked who I lived with, and I told him I lived alone, so I did not think I needed a system. Still, he kept pushing. He asked if I could at least give him my phone number so he could follow up in a couple of weeks. He also said he would waive the installation fee. At that moment, I thought it might not be a bad deal, so I agreed and gave him my number. He thanked me and walked away. After that, I went into the kitchen to make dinner, then returned to the living room and continued watching Yellowstone. I had been binge watching it, going through episode after episode while sitting on the couch. Around 11 that night, there was another knock at the door. That is way too late for anyone to be knocking, especially out here. I am not close with my neighbors, so I doubted it was one of them. I ignored it and kept watching TV, but the knocking did not stop. It continued, and I still refused to get up. There was no way I was opening the door at 11 p.m., so I stayed seated. When there was a third round of knocking, I started to feel uneasy. Whoever it was not leaving. I got up and went to the door, asking who was there. There was no response. It felt exactly like the beginning of a horror movie. I had no intention of opening the door to find out. I spoke through the door and said I was not interested in anything they were trying to sell. Then I added that I had a gun and was not afraid to use it. I did not actually own one, but it seemed like a simple way to scare someone off. The knocking stopped after that. I went back to the couch. A few moments later, my phone started ringing. The caller ID showed 911 Emergency Services. I had never received a call from 911 before, and I did not even know that was something that could happen. I always assumed calls from the police would show up differently. I answered, and a man on the other end asked if I was George. I said yes. He told me he was from the police department and that officers were outside my home. He said there had been a reported crime nearby and they needed to ask me some questions. Something about it felt completely off. I asked him to have the officers come to the window so I could confirm who they were before opening the door. He said he could not do that. He claimed they were already outside, which made no sense. I told him I was not answering any questions and ended the call. Even if it had been real police, I knew I was not required to open the door. But this situation felt like a setup in every possible way. They called again from the same number. I declined the call and turned on Do Not Disturb. Then I decided to call 911 myself to check if the calls were real. The operator immediately confirmed they were fake. Combined with the fact that someone had been knocking at my door, she told me to lock everything, grab something I could use to defend myself, and stay inside until officers arrived. While I was still on the phone with her, I heard the back door handle being messed with. Someone was trying to force it open. Then came loud banging, like someone was trying to kick the door in. I told the operator what was happening, and she said officers would arrive in under 10 minutes. I needed them there immediately. I went near the door and yelled, and a voice from outside shouted that it was the police and I needed to open up. Then came another hard kick against the door. The back door is next to a window, unlike the front. I looked out and I saw two men trying to break in. They were wearing masks that looked like sacks over their heads, with holes cut out for their eyes and mouths. They noticed me looking at them, and I think they also saw that I was on the phone. They must have realized I was speaking with the real police, because they suddenly ran off into the darkness. About 5 minutes later, there was another knock, this time from actual officers. I let them inside. One of them was very thorough, and even checked the entire property. 2 police cars stayed parked outside with their lights on for about half an hour, which likely discouraged anyone from coming back. After they left, I noticed one of the cars remained nearby for several hours. At some point during the night, they eventually drove off. But I am completely done opening the door for anyone unexpected. I am almost certain that the man who came earlier pretending to sell security systems was actually scouting houses. It seems likely that he and his group were using fake 911 calls to trick people into opening their doors late at night. I later went to my closest neighbors and asked if the same man had approached them. They said no. For whatever reason, my house was the only one on the street they targeted. Maybe I was just the first one they tried, and I gave the impression that I would be an easy target.